Ed, we've been talking a little bit this morning about Elon Musk and that conversation he had for more than 2 hours on X last night. And your new piece in the Financial Times is titled Elon Musk and the Danger to Democracy. In it, Ed writes this: the key question is what, if anything, democracies can do to address the danger from Musk. It is one thing having a newspaper proprietor or the owner of a television station pushing their biases in their outlets. This has always happened, and it's protected speech. I have no idea what the best legal remedy would be that was consistent with democratic and free speech values. I do know, however, Ed writes, that whatever he says, Musk is no fan of either. He revels in conflict and is fascinated by the possibility of collapse. He's a disaster capitalist, a vicious troll, and a brilliant engineer rolled into one. And Caddy K, obviously, this is also a man who has made very clear his intention to support Donald Trump, as he did, giving him an open forum last night to millions of people. Elon Musk is on the side of Donald Trump in this election.
Yeah, whether he's a brilliant engineer after that 40 minutes we all spent kind of listening to clanky music, I'm not quite so sure. Or maybe he's fired too many brilliant engineers and they couldn't get it working again. I mean, what do you think in terms of the impact on some voters who might have sat through that 40-minute glitch, Ed, last night and actually listened to the content of the interview? What impact do you think Elon Musk has sort of on voters in particular and on this election?
Well, you're right about the engineering. I mean, if you can't get spaces working, you know, you're going to have trouble settling Mars. Look, only about 1.3 million people listened to this. It took an age to begin, and I was one of those who did wait around for it to begin. And then, of course, it never ended. It just went on and on and on. It wasn't an interview. It was a very softball, quite eccentric conversation between a donor and his candidate. None of the tough questions were asked. I mean, Musk did try and sort of push some of his hobby horses, like controlling spending, which Trump would hear nothing of. Trump is not into controlling spending. But I think the net effect here is really just to confirm what we saw in Trump's press conference in Mar-a-Lago last week, and when he addressed the National Association of Black Journalists a couple of days before, which is that he isn't resetting. He's not a new Trump. He's not a disciplined, razor-like focused new candidate who is going to define Kamala Harris. He is, as somebody else made the analogy, he's like Spinal Tap on tour, an aging rock band on tour playing its greatest hits. I don't think he's going to come up with anything new.
Musk. So we have X and what he's doing to try to help Trump, and there's that impact that we should worry about, I think. But what I actually worry about is technology, not spaces, but space. SpaceX, the Starlink satellite network. It is extraordinary for one man to have such power, to have power over this unique network of satellites that has been, for example, crucial to the war effort in Ukraine, that he actually has the power to switch on and off. You know, the astronauts who are now up at the International Space Station may not be able to get home until one of Elon Musk's spacecraft, not one of NASA's, but one of Musk's, can go pick them up. So I'm concerned about that. What are your thoughts about his dominion at this point over the space realm?
I mean, it's remarkable. Starlink, as you say, he threatened to withdraw, and briefly did withdraw, Starlink services from the Ukrainian forces, who rely almost exclusively on it for on-the-ground communications in life and death battlefield situations. And he just applied the pressure on Ukraine. He basically wanted a better contract out of them. And so at a really key stage in the Russian special military operation, as Putin called it, Musk, of course, has also shown a great deal of sympathy for Putin. This kind of reliance on a mega oligarch, I mean, the richest man in the world, is, I think, an extremely dangerous one for democracy. My point about Musk's risk to democracy was also about X, his use of X. And my own country, as you know, has had race riots. It's had racist attacks on refugee communities based on false information that a Muslim refugee had killed these 3 girls a few days ago in the UK. Musk not only allowed the amplification of that misinformation, potentially lethal disinformation, but he retweeted and endorsed far-right people in Britain, far-right racist thugs, let's not mince our words about this, who he had reinstated on the site, on X, that helped generate riot situations on the ground. This is a proprietor tilting the disinformation playing field towards really bad actors. And so my concern is if he can do that in that kind of situation and saying things like civil war is inevitable, he wants conflict. If he can stoke racial conflict in situations like that, well, what can he do when push comes to shove in this U.S. general election? Now that he's explicitly endorsed Donald Trump, he can be an extremely consequential and bad actor. And I think we ought to pay a lot of attention to this. Musk is not well-intentioned when it comes to U.S. liberal democracy.
The new piece is a Financial Times website. U.S. national editor at the Financial Times, Ed Luce. Ed, thanks so much as always. Still